And today we're going over chapter 4, which is elements of narrative. So a little bit different than you've learned to compare to narrative film, but in the first 4 slides of this PowerPoint, we have all the different shots you should have learned by now and their definitions. And I'm not going to run through them all, but I wanted to bring that to your attention so you'll look for them. If you downloaded this PowerPoint early on, you may want to go back and revisit it, because since I've added these to help you with terms that you can deal with as you head towards the first discussion of the films as a group. So if you see all of these different terms, make sure you understand them. And if you don't understand them yet, then you want to go back and revisit them as we continue to move on with different terms in chapter 4. And we have different meanings to narrative now. It's the cinematic structure of a film where you have the story line happening, cause and effect, sequences occurring over time, but then there's the narrative movie, which is a fiction film. Narration is the act of telling the story. It can be done from the camera's perspective, or the last term, the narrator, the person or voice that you hear telling the story. And that's what we'll be centering on at first. The primary narrator, the camera, the ability to capture the image and let you hear the sounds associated with that image or insert extra sounds to narrate to you those images, the arrangement, the composition, the lighting, the sound, all the visual elements captured in the shot. So lighting, set design, makeup, performance, editing all contribute to the narrative. So once again, lighting of the shot, how the set is designed for the camera to capture the shot, the makeup used on the performers, actors, the performance itself, and editing all contribute to the narrative. Very important for you to think about as we move on. Narrator types. First person, you hear a voice, but it may address the audience directly. In other words, you're sitting in the theater and you hear this voice come to you and talk to you. It's called a voice over, a voice that you will identify with in some way to a character in the film. That's first person. Third person, the voice is imposed from outside the narrative. In this case, a third person would be someone you don't really know in the film who's talking. Omniscient is restricted access to all aspects of the narrative and characters, as well as information that no character knows. So that omniscient would be from the camera's perspective, unrestricted as far as you learning more about the story and the characters, and no other character knows that information in the film. And then restricted information that provides limited knowledge of a single character. You learn it from the narrative, but the other characters might not know it in that storyline. So the best types of characters then to understand this, usually we just give you the 2 basic ones. Round characters in the film, they're very lifelike. You can associate them with real life. They have complex personalities, and that personality may change as the story progresses. That's a round character. Flat characters have distinct traits. They do not change significantly as the story progresses. So as you watch a film, you can refer to one person as a round character or a flat character. Then those characters also have different situations in every film. The protagonist is the primary character, and that protagonist is pursuing a specific goal or goals. An antagonist is a person or persons, maybe a creature or some sort of force that is restricting or obstructing the protagonist from achieving the goal. An anti-hero is an unsympathetic protagonist chasing a less than noble goal. In other words, someone who's doing something that we would not consider appropriate. Imperfect characters in a narrative have obstacles. They need character development, and they need motivations to round them out and make them a specific type of character. Narrative structure. Usually a film is broken down into 3 parts. The opening, which is called the beginning or Act 1. After the Act 1, where the story is established, we go to the middle part of the film, or Act 2. And this is the longest section that leads to the climax as the story develops. And then, of course, the end, Act 3, where everything is resolved. You get an answer to what has happened in that story. The screenwriter is the person who builds the story from what that person's given, creates a screenplay. And there's various stages as they start from scratch or by adapting information from another source, like a book, magazine article, short story. All those have been used to create a screenplay for the film. The screenwriter will build the narrative structure based on what the director tells them to do. They have characters, action, dialogue, and settings. It's not your typical read. It would be very descriptive as to the setting or the room that it takes place or the location, and it builds that so that the actor can take the script and develop a structure themselves for how they're going to handle it. So it is a precisely prescribed format used where one page usually equals 1 minute of screen time. Then you have diegetic and non-diegetic. Diegetic elements are what we see and hear on the screen that come from inside the film world or part of the story. So diegetic elements would relate to characters you know, objects you see, settings in each scene, sounds from the world of the story that you can identify with. Non-diegetic elements you see, hear them on the screen, but they come from outside the world of film, outside the story. So when you see a title appear, the name of the film, an actor's name, those are titles. They appear and are inserted outside the film world. Credits at the end of the movie, the long list of all the locations, all the people that worked on it, and music. If it's obvious that it's not originating from the world of the film, like a band playing, it is non-diegetic. So any of the music you hear that establishes a character's feeling or the moment or creates tension is non-diegetic. Then the voiceovers we talked about from the narrators and third-person narratives are all outside of the film world. So remember that, a voiceover or third-person narratives. Now the story and the plot intertwine. The story will have implied events while the plot might have non-diegetic material included in them. They cross over with the explicitly presented events that you see in the film. So a story is all the explicit and implicit narrative elements of the movie. The plot is the specific actions and events in the order of the events, all related, and that will include non-diegetic elements. Plot order and events. Plot order is the fundamental decision filmmakers make about how to tell the story. Whether it all happens at a specific time, they put it in a flashback, they do a flash forward, or use other elements. That's part of the plot. Events happen in a logical order and are relatively significant to the story to help you learn about the story, experience the film. They can be major events or minor secondary events, which could be used to distract you or make you think so that something later will come as a surprise. Elements of narration, duration. How long of a shot is shown? What's the length of time it takes to tell what has occurred? Duration might be the entire movie. What's the time element for the duration of the movie? Story duration, the length of time that it is implied as to when the story occurs or takes place. Plot duration, the elapsed time of the events explicitly presented in a film that the film takes to occur. Plot duration or scenes. Screen duration is the entire running time of the screen expressed in minutes or an hour in minutes, depending on what source you use. So a lot of different durations there that make a difference in the film. Okay, elements of narrative related to exposition. It provides background information, on the characters, the setting of the story, and basic conflict or conflicts. And the exposition also ends with the inciting moment that sets the rest of the narrative in motion. So you can look for the exposition to establish the characters and then put the narrative in motion for the rest of the film. Elements of narrative as far as suspense and surprise. Surprise can be something that takes you unaware, that you did not expect. It can be shocking. Or your emotional response is generally short-lived and scan only what has happened the same way once. So that surprise moment that grabs you, shocks you. Suspense creates anxiety. Anxiety is brought on because of uncertainty, not knowing what's going to happen next. And the means by which it is created may happen with certain sounds, certain music, certain movement, the lighting. We all are warned, and that way can be empathetic to the characters as the suspense builds. Repetition. Repetition's used all the time. Watch for similar story elements that occur over and over again. It can be a word, it can be an image, it can be an action. So as you watch the story develop, look for those elements that are repeated in some way. Familiar image. You hear audio or a visual image that the director puts in repeatedly in the movie to help stabilize the narrative. It makes you feel like you're understanding what's going on. It can be done by repetition. It calls attention to itself as a narrative element, but it may be symbolic as well. So look for shading, look for reflection. Is there a certain image that always appears? And what can that image mean as far as the narrative? Setting and scope. Last one. Setting is the time and place in which the story occurs, not the time we're at right now as we watch the film. The two can be the same, but they have a particular approach to a time and a place to set the mood. So that's called the setting. Scope is the overall range in time and place of a movie's story. So it can be a very long range of time, like an entire war, an entire conflict, or specific moment, as in a sports story, which is one game, one moment in a game. It all relates to that specific scope. So use scope as identifying how the movie ranges in time and when it has occurred. It can be from a very, very distant time in the 1800s, or it could be present day. So that's all relating to film narrative and the elements of narrative. And that leads us to a very significant chapter, chapter 5, mise en scène, which combines all those elements and different parts into a frame and expands it beyond the frame. And we'll be talking about that next time.